Welcome to the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, the show that takes pop culture and treats it like artifacts in a museum so that we can learn history through popular culture. The Mississippi Blues Trail and the $1 Million Quartet Jukebox Musical are intertwined in a few ways. First, and most obvious, without the evolution of the blues as a music form up and down the Mississippi River, then there would be little encouragement for Sam Phillips to open his Memphis recording services, create the Sun Records label, and by 1956 have a lineup of musical talent worth at least $1 million. Then, of course, is the Elvis Presley connection. Although Phillips had published several blues singers, most of whom were African American from nearby Mississippi, the social and political climate of the 1950s told him that he needed a white singer with similar talents to appeal to a wide audience. Presley, originally from Tupelo, Mississippi, a heavily trafficked stop on the Blues Highway, fit the bill, and the middle of the decade saw him become the face, voice, and hips of rock and roll. Finally, there is the timing of both of today's topics. While sites significant to the development of the blues have had history markers placed near them for decades, an actual Mississippi Blues Commission and official tourist trail was created in 2006. The $1 Million Quartet musical premiered the same year. After all, December 4th marked the 50th anniversary of when Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, and Jerry Lee Lewis, each at pivotal moments in their respective rock and roll careers, collected at Sun Records in Memphis for a historic jam session. Therefore, this two-tiered episode is less about the 1950s, or Sun Records, or the blues, and more about the early 21st century and a desire by the creative forces behind the two subjects to secure for all time these important cultural milestones. To help me in this analysis are Aaron Scott and Daniel Durston. Aaron is a documentarian, podcaster, and Mississippi blues expert. Daniel is a musician, actor, playwright, reality star, and most notably a stellar Elvis Presley tribute artist. I couldn't ask for a better team to unpack these two intersecting primary sources, the Mississippi Blues Trail and the $1 Million Quartet musical. I think when it comes to the primary source analysis forms, the thing I share with you, and that we go through all the, for those of you listening for the first time, what we do is we take things that are not usually treated like artifacts, in this case, a roadway and music that comes from that roadway and why it's connected that way. And we look at it like you would an artifact in a museum and dissect it and try to tell, what does it tell us from history? And so I'm going to start with location. That's that question. Where is it located? And you were mentioning before we hit record, in our messages back and forth, that you think it only makes sense to look at it geographically, as starting in the north and moving further south as the Blues Highway. So what do you consider to be the northern reach of this roadway?
Technically in Tennessee.
Okay.
The deal is I focus on Mississippi itself. If you were to look into the tourism side of it, you can find a site that deals only with Mississippi Blues Trail itself, which covers all sites within Mississippi, but also out of state and even out of the country, that deals with historic sites and anything dealt with history and the blues itself. So Mississippi finds itself in just the foundation of the blues itself. And going down this highway is part of that. A lot of people, it's a surprise when I talk to someone, and when I was doing this and talking to business people on that side, that a lot of tourism comes from out of the country.
Oh, really?
No one realizes that a lot of people, well, I've met some, will come into Memphis, rent motorbikes, or get on a bus tour and come down. And you're getting tourism from the biggest niche is Australia. And then I've met a few Swedes and Norwegians, and then definitely English as well.
Yeah. So, it starts out, so if we're focusing on the Mississippi part, it seems the actual official blues trail, the markered locations, that's relatively new. We're talking early 21st century when they started putting the actual plaques at historic
Correct. Hmm.
locations. And I want to talk about that in just a moment. But as far as being recognized, like you could go on this history trail before 2006, right? Like people I'm sure who knew their blues music would be able to go and appreciate the fact that this is, where the blues and major events in the development of the blues and major moments in the music form happened at these different places. You wouldn't necessarily need the plaques to tell you that, correct? Like people that know their stuff would be able to find these places.
The plaques itself point out where people stayed or what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what you're talking about are juke joints. One of the la one Po Monkeys, which the Smith people hoped that the Smithsonian would take over and things. I just found out people fought back and forth. I think somebody told me it was actually Po Monkeys, looked like it had been in a shack that had been taken over. It was actually taken and built in the 60s, has been torn down, but all the artifacts went to auction and one woman bought it.
Mm-hmm.
One, if you go to Clarksdale, which is probably an hour from Memphis. I couldn't tell you because I usually don't fly into Memphis. I go somewhere I'm coming from somewhere else. There is a kind of created that looks like a juke joint, but then if you cross the railroad tracks, there is a true juke joint called Reds, which is there, and a lot of venues are still played there. Also, if you go to Indianola, where B.B. King lived and was not born, lived, and there is the B.B. King Museum and where his cemetery is, he bought the Club Ebony. And hopefully, if I do my season 2 of my podcast, we'll be focusing and talking about the restoration of Club Ebony.
Mm-hmm.
There is also, I just traveled and met Jimmy Duck Holmes, who was Grammy nominated, and he has a juke joint, but it's kind of off the beaten path. You have to go to Betonia, and it's a specific genre of blues called Betonia blues, and he's in Betonia. And he is a really big part of the community, and that's a true story. I mean, he said, from the time he could basically see up above the counter, he was working there. So he's been running, it's a family-owned business, and it's been a lot. And the juke joint itself is not only live music, but it was about jukeboxes there. That's why the title is there. And what it was people were going there the night before they went to church. So there was a little bit of, little
Yeah, but something that
raunchiness, and then
right,
a
but so
little
they
bit
have to
of
repent
not.
for the
Yeah.
next day. Yeah,
Yes.
they can feel okay doing it that night because they know they're going to church the next
Yes.
day. So it's a
And
big.
I
It's
even
not,
spoke to a woman recently who had a wonderful voice, and she said, I don't know if I want to play the blues because of the blues. I want to be in the church. And we had to really kind of push her and say, hey, think about this. So, yes, so we'll see what happens with her because she's got it.
that's incredible. Would you say that there is a geographic component to the actual blues music itself? That it really probably could not have germinated from anywhere else besides this region along the Mississippi River and up and down the as you enter deep south in Mississippi itself. Is it exclusive to that section of the country?
They talk about it being become from the cotton fields and all that, and the rhythm of that, and also just the African, well, slavery coming over, and that type of probably tribes coming and doing this type of rhythm. But you also have immigrating up to the north. You have the sound of the trains as well.
Hmm.
The You're asking about a geography. The fight or folklore or fact, and it is along the trail, is they say Dockery Farms is, people will say, is the place that the blues started. And I do not know why. I haven't really done a lot of research on
Yeah.
that, so I could not tell you why. I'm just like, I drive by it and I'm like, hey, there's Dockery Farms again.
Right. Well, I mean, because I've done a few podcasts about rock and roll, and rhythm and blues combined equals rock and roll, and there are various places throughout the country that could give a reasonable claim to this is where rock and roll started, and some a little bit stronger than others, but you could make the argument for Cleveland. You could make the argument for Memphis. You could make the argument for Lubbock, Texas, as being this is where the actual transition from blues and country formed into a new music form. But what you're saying here is when it comes to the actual blues themselves, this is something that is pretty exclusive to the Mississippi River region of the country, and that's why there's because when you go up and down, when I think of the blues, when I think of the music, it's like the theme music for the midsection of the country, north and south. I think of Chicago, I think of St. Louis, I think of of course all the way down to New Orleans and everywhere else in between. That's kind of the if I was making a movie or a documentary about that region of the country, I would definitely choose blues as the kind of music that it would be going along with. So it definitely seems to have that kind of component. Now, when it comes to the actual trail itself, was there a because it seemed like it was for the purposes of preserving culture. Was it in the works for a while, or was it just a result of people who put in the time, the research, and really had the passion to make sure that these various locations significant to the blues had to be preserved or at least recognized?
I think you would have to talk more to Scott and the other gentlemen that work on that point on the markers. The deal is Mississippi needs tourism.
Hmm.
I am closer to the people in Clarksdale, and unfortunately, the mayor has passed, and we have a new mayor. Uh, the man in the story, the best story, is talking to the man with cat head, which I call it, is really cat head Delta Cultural Arts Center. It's a store
Hmm.
in Cleveland. His story is amazing, and it's somewhat similar to mine, even though he's a little bit older than my age. He was, I think, from Indiana, moved to St. Louis, was in advertising, saved up, kept coming back to festivals, and a local in Clarksdale said, Bubba O'Keefe said, when are you coming to Clarksdale? When are you staying? And uh, Roger Stoley said, well, let me think about it. And he said, and this was an amazing thing business wise, he saved 2 years of his salary before he left and came
Mm.
to Clarksdale. He owns his own store. I call him the Deacon of the Delta. He's taken all the old bluesmen that have, unfortunately, the true authentic, well, I'd say authentic, or that genre that has died. He took them to Europe and everything before that. Yes, his store has just, it's all the tourists coming. He's on the tourism board and everything like that, and they really worked at getting more festivals in and things like that. So Clarksdale is a big spot for getting tourists in. The Blues Trail, excuse me, is a big part of bringing people in to see Mississippi. There is also a civil rights trail, which I don't have the right term for that, there's also a couple of other trails. And part of that deal is, and I wanted to say, is that right now we have the Riverside Hotel that does need help. So there is a GoFundMe campaign on that because it was where Bessie Smith, let me look at my notes, sorry about that. She died there, and it was a hotel that was on the Green book itself because no black artist could stay anywhere else.
Oh, really? Okay. So
And yes, so it's very, yes, and it's in need of help. It needs funding to stay. And I was there the other day, and yes, it needs a lot of help right now. And so we're still working on that. And if you go to my Facebook page, you can find as well, or Roger Stoley's Cat Head page, you can find what needs the GoFundMe page is. But they're still trying to raise money for to help work on that and things like that.
it
So
seems like this entire thing is very much a case study in how, in some cases, hundreds of years of history can lead into some of the good and bad that we're dealing with now in the 21st century, where, like you said, this hotel, this, that wouldn't allow for, is the only place that a black performer could go to stay the night. That's something steeped in years of history of segregation, and before that was slavery, and before, so it's like this is like the output, and now people are having a drive, they want to preserve the history, and that's something that's national, if not international, as far as people looking at what they have around them and realizing the historical significance of it, and trying to hold on to it, because on the one hand, yes, tourism is very important. That's a necessary thing for, in this case, a state to benefit from. But on the other hand, it's also just for the general cultural betterment and knowledge that people have about the past. And so if you knock a building down, even if you put the nicest marker there, if you knock the actual building down, it's a little bit harder for it to mean anything to years from now.
I think a lot of people, and this is what's within tape, I'll say, because I'm an older person, and if you drive to Tunica, the gas station called the Blue and White is old, and it's a food memory for a lot of people who would come up through 61 to go shopping to
Mm-hmm.
Memphis. They would stop either to when they went shopping or when they come back. It was right across the way as a McDonald's. You don't have a lot of places that you have to eat locally. You can't not go to a Starbucks and things, and people are used to that. Mississippi doesn't truly have that many interstates to go on,
Mm.
and that's another thing. So it's lucky that Eisenhower didn't do that to Mississippi, but it also is a hindrance in some ways to
Yeah.
Mississippi that we don't have that interstate thing within the state. So I think that's part of it. And that's what, in my thesis with repurposed gas stations, there was some of that, that even though we didn't have an interstate, you still had, because cotton and tobacco and other things were going down or dwindling, you had towns that were dying. And
Right.
now, unfortunately, this is a state that has to survive on tourism. And the blues is one way to do that. And the hard thing is looking at our pop culture, we're going to have a hard time doing that. So there has to be some way to pull everything back in or get people to come see things. And that's going to be a challenge. But yes, I think there is some things that can be done.
The last 3 decades or so have seen an emphasis on authenticity and accuracy, in the world of historic interpretation at least. This has come about for a variety of reasons, but the overarching reason is because modern technology has made it possible for anyone with a computer, time, and passion to research every single detail of their chosen subject. So whether it be the clientele at juke joints, or the deeds to childhood homes of blues singers, or the specific way Elvis Presley wore his hair of 1956, the primary and secondary sources that will shine the light on the truth are available to more people than ever before in the internet age. Case in point, I initially resisted buying tickets to see the $1 Million Quartet, the musical, when I learned it was being performed locally for a few weeks. After all, I visited the actual Sun Records in Memphis 2 summers ago, and the very authentic experience of standing where Elvis stood and holding the exact microphone of the King, Cash, Lewis, and Perkins is still fresh in my mind. How could that be topped? But the more the ads came up, and I got a feel for how well the musicians matched their iconic roles, I relented and bought tickets to the second-to-last performance. Boy, did I not regret that decision. The show is incredible, and if it comes to a stage near you, don't hesitate to go. In true 21st century form, the actors become their characters in every single way, making the audience convinced that they have been transported to Memphis, Tennessee in the last weeks of 1956. Today we're going to be talking about $1 Million Quartet as a primary source, and you were in a couple different ways, because as a teacher, and I'm a social studies teacher, I'm a history teacher, and so I work with my students all the time between talking about primary sources as documents, as artifacts of different time periods, and a lot of times they come up and say, like, well, so what? Once I analyze this thing, what does that do for me? And I'm like, this is a perfect example of what you do with a primary source. So this entire musical is based on a real event that was documented in photograph and in record at Sun Records in Memphis, Tennessee. And you were telling me before I hit record that one of the things that you did after you started performing as Elvis in the show is you took some time to check out the studio itself when you were on a break. Could you tell us a little bit about that visit?
Yeah, so I'm a professional Elvis tribute artist now in Las Vegas, and what started my career is this musical, $1 Million Quartet, and I started it on the national tour back in 2017. It was a 2.5-year tour for me, and I want to say it's about maybe not even a year into it, we had a week or so off. And when everyone went home, for the holidays or beginning of December, I was like, well, I've been to Elvis's house, but I was super young. I didn't really understand it. And I've never been to Sun Records because I didn't know what it was until I got older. Mm-hmm. And now it's clearly a very prominent thing in my life because of the show. And, for those who don't know, the show's based or is in Sun Records studios and of that night. So by chance, my off time was the week of December 4th, and this musical is based on December 4th, 1956. So December 4th, 2017, I believe it was, I got to visit Graceland in the morning. So I went through Elvis's house and the museum, I think about 4 hours worth, and I think I felt rushed. I could have been there even longer.
Yeah.
And then I went to Sun Records and did the tour, and it was truly a religious experience. I went alone, which I prefer when something's special and new to me. I just want to fully engulf it and, appreciate it and not worry about anyone else around me. And by chance, maybe I can send you the video, but if you scroll back far enough on my Instagram, there'll be a video where I finished the tour. We did the whole upstairs, downstairs tour. And the tour guy comes up to me and says, and this is when I had a pompadour, I didn't have a hat on, nothing. So she's like, I feel like I know you. And I was like, well, we all kind of look the same, making a joke. I was like, but I'm currently on the national tour, $1 Million Quartet, portraying Elvis. And immediately she was like, okay, wait here when everyone leaves. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think I know where this is going. So, it's only like 10 of us. And within 20 minutes, everyone's gone. They took their photos, this and that, and they all leave. And she closes the door behind everybody. And she looks at me, she goes, okay, what do you want to do? And I was like, what? And she was like, anything you want. You want to play guitar? You want to sing? And I was like, oh, and we were alone, me and her. And I was like,
Oh man,
oh my God, this is a dream come true. And
that
I
is
just
incredible.
started portraying Elvis. So I'm like really fresh into this, but I have studied him for like 6 years at this point. So she picks up a guitar and she goes, do you want to play the Elvis guitar? And I'm like, what does that even mean? You know, like, so it was I think it was the black Gibson that he had in his later years, in the 70s years.
Yeah.
And I guess it was like Bono, U2 played it on one of their albums or something like that. She goes down the list. I'm like, oh, you're making this even crazier. Long story short, I'm alone and I start playing That's All Right, Mama at the same spot where Elvis recorded
Oh my goodness.
it.
Well, that's all right, mommy. That's all right with you. That's all right, mommy. Just any way you do, that's all right. Well, that's all right. Well, that's all right now, mama. Any way you do. Well, mama,
And if you look at the video, I look completely emotionless because I'm so like in shock and like, I don't know, my soul like wasn't even present. It was crazy, but
That's incredible.
yeah, I got to do the whole song. She filmed it on my phone without me knowing, and then at the end, I got to post it a couple weeks later or so. But it was a very special moment, and that's the last time I've been there. I don't know, I can't really top it, so I don't know if I should ever go back.
Yeah, but I mean, that is such an incredible story, and just and all of it, because you're on a short list of people that have portrayed Elvis, and I mean seriously portrayed Elvis, not just, because it seemed like in like the 80s and stuff there was a lot of Elvis impersonators, and it became almost a thing where it was just like way too many, and they were always portraying like older Elvis and less desirable like the not the Elvis that came from the 50s,
Right.
that one. And so it's like there's a short list of people that I think have really portrayed him accurately, and you're on that list.
Thank
and then
you.
to go to his home and then go to the spot where it all started, that must have been just like incredible. I mean, because I remember when I was taking the tour at Sun Records, they made the point that it's like people come here all the time. It's like a pilgrimage for a lot of folks. And recording artists, like they mentioned U2 recorded there, and they record there every night. It's like they actually use it as a real studio every single night. And there are some who kind of think that they are kind of like above everybody else. Like, well, of course you want me to come record at Sun Records because I'm rock and roll royalty, and why not? And they're like, nope, it's the same rules for you as everybody else. You have to wait till the tours are over and pay your money, and then we'll record with you.
Yep.
But for somebody who is, and I like that word, tribute to Elvis, not impersonator, tribute to Elvis. That must have been just the most incredible thing for everybody involved, not just you, but like them being like, oh my God, he's here. Like, this is the guy.
I didn't think much of it at the time because, in my head, like you said, it was so like so many people have impersonated him, this and that, and I was new to it. So I was just thinking, oh, I'm just another guy, like coming through. But
they get one of these every day. Like some guy comes in, he's like, can I sing? And that.
And that's fine, but it's Sun Records, it's Elvis's home, and like all that. So it's like, oh, I'm just another guy saying that I portray Elvis. And but they really respect it. I'm sure they don't care who you are or where you come from. If you have the love for Elvis or anyone that walked through that room, they really appreciate you. But luckily I was doing it on a professional level. So I think they have a different form of like, obviously she closed the door behind everybody for me. But it was super special. And now looking back, like, I don't know, to have you say like a short list of people who do it legitimately is still special here. Cause I don't think of it that way because I try to work hard to be as good as I can be, and no one could be as good as Elvis, so we can only try to be in all the things. But yeah, it's pretty cool to hear it from someone else's perspective.
I think by the early 2000s when that show came together, and a few other components, like that's around the same time that the movie Walk the Line came out.
Yep.
And that was right after Johnny Cash died, so I think that factored into it as well. I think says something about the early 2000s, because those of us who were growing up in that era, and we didn't get to know those figures at all. I was born 1981, so Elvis had died 4 years before I was even born.
Yeah.
Even my parents say they kind of missed Elvis too, because they were born in the late 40s. So they were a little bit too young. Like, they didn't get into him that much because they were like, under age of 10 by the time he went off into the army. So like they, they were more like Beatles, like they were 60s teenagers. So they missed that window too. And when I discovered Elvis in the 90s, I mean, I discovered Elvis, but like when I, started buying his records, like the first thing I noticed, I'm like, when I bought the black and white record, the album with the pink and the greens, is Elvis Presley. The first thing I said, I'm like, that's the Clash. Like the Clash, I'm like, they totally took London Calling is Elvis Presley's first album. They recognized the connection there. And I was just getting into punk rock and stuff, and I'm like, wow, okay. So, and I almost felt like rebellious in a way because I was listening to music from my parents' time. It was like the weirdest thing because I didn't have that connection. I wasn't there when Elvis was alive. Johnny Cash's career wasn't fading, but he wasn't the vibrant young singer that he was, by 1981. And as I'm growing up, Johnny Cash was just kind of like, yeah, he's that country guy,
Right.
He's wearing the black, that's his thing. And sadly, Carl Perkins, because he had died, and Jerry Lee Lewis was just the guy who married his cousin. Like that seemed to be, just like those early rockers. And, by the 80s and 90s, we didn't have much, connection to them. But then when we get into the early 2000s and we're like recognizing, we're like, wow, that music's incredible. That's like the best thing ever. And where has this been my whole life? Why have I been listening to all this other stuff when I could have been, listening to, the Sun Records stuff? I mean, that is just gold. So when you were getting ready for the transformation to become Elvis, did you like just dive right into all of that same early 50s stuff, all of his recordings from then, and tried to see where you could kind of find him?
Yeah. So I lucked out. I grew up with, my dad was a huge Beatles fan. My mom was a huge Elvis fan. So I did get the best of both worlds, in my opinion. And I naturally became a huge Beatles fan. And it wasn't until this musical, when it came out on Broadway, that I was like, wait, because I'm a theater kid. I love theater. I grew up playing guitar since I was 10. And then I was like, well, I've been in bands my whole life. I love theater. And now there's this Broadway show where you can, if you resemble one of the guys, you get to play guitar, you get to sing, you get to act, all the things. And I was like, well, I'm 6'2", and I could probably do Johnny Cash because it's his height, but Elvis is 6'1", so I'm like, well, I could probably do Elvis, and I prefer, his music a little more. And so it was this musical on Broadway in 2010 that made me go, maybe I should study Elvis a little more than just the general songs that we all kind of know off the top of our heads. And because the show's in the 50s, I, definitely dove into his 50s tracks. And even before the show, I naturally prefer Elvis' early years anyway. His voice, everything about it. And then if you watch videos, even more, the way he danced, and it was so new and fresh at the time. And dangerous, as they would call it. But and he truly was like punk rock for that era, which is kind of cool.
He was.
I grew up a punk rock kid in the 90s, early 2000s. But yeah, so I started studying early Elvis to audition for this show when it was going to go on the first national tour. With that said, I didn't get the part for 6 years. So I kept studying it, going, what am I doing wrong? And that doesn't mean I was doing something wrong. They might have just wanted someone else or whatever. But when I look back on old videos, though, they're nowhere near what they are now, So I definitely gotten better. And but that's when I dove into his whole life, as an actor, you all want to understand what you're talking about and where he came from. And I fell in love with him as a person. Like I didn't realize how much I would really love and respect him beyond the music, because I didn't know any difference
Yeah.
And once I really studied his life and his upbringing and how it all came to be, I had so much love and respect for him that I assume it started to show in auditions, or then once I got the tour, after 6 years of auditioning, I booked the national tour, and then I dove even harder. I was like, well, if I'm officially portraying him, let's make sure we do it the best way possible, as right as I possibly can. And so I really dove in not only to his music, but all the old Sun records, recordings before Elvis was there, like Prisoners and stuff like that, Howlin' Wolf, and anyone that he was inspired by, like the Ink Spots and Big Mama Thornton, stuff like that. And for about a year straight on tour, I would only listen to that style of music / only early Elvis. I watched every possible documentary on Elvis that I've ever even heard of. Only up until about up until he goes to the army, I usually would stop at that time.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to stay in the era, and his death makes me very sad also. But yeah, so I went pretty hardcore into it, and it's definitely has only helped me, develop what I do as an actor in the show, but also just like what I do professionally now as Elvis in Vegas and stuff like that. I take it pretty seriously, and I care about how he's portrayed to an audience. And I hope when people come see me and this show specifically, that they are looking for a more authentic, grounded version of Elvis, because that's the one I try to portray, because that's who he really was and not who we think he was. I always say 50% of the battle is looking like him. That's my thoughts on that. And so I've tried to study the way he looks and dances, because you're going to judge by looking first, whether it's a tribute show or this show. And so once I hopefully win people over with the look, they'll give me a little more space to go, all right, well, let's now prove it with your voice, and then prove it with the dance moves, And so that's a personal weight that I carry. I don't think all Elvises do that, or at least not in Million Dollar Quartet. I've met some Elvises that do Million Dollar Quartet, and they don't think it's a big deal to look like him. They don't think it's a big deal to do this and that, and that's their version. But I remember when I went and saw the show on a professional level, all I thought was, if this doesn't look like Elvis or sound like him, I'm going to be pissed. And so and luckily the first one I saw was Cody Ray Slaughter on the national tour, which is a world champion, and he's still one of the greatest. And so I look up to him to this day, where it's like, I remember seeing him walk on that stage going, oh, okay, so it's going to be a really good show then, because this Elvis is perfect. And so, I do carry that weight still to this day, and I hope I don't ever let go of that, because I want to make sure I'm on top of it, and hopefully doing the best I can to look and portray him. And on top of that, there's another layer of his voice stylings, which some people may not know. His earlier years was a higher register tenor that sometimes he would scream / yell. It was super punk rock. And then he still had his gospel, area of his voice. And then he has like country twang, hillbilly, like there's so many different variations of his voice in the 50s that I try to emulate each one. And some Elvises will choose to stay in one area and use it for every song, because it probably feels better on the voice, to be honest. It took many years for my throat to even get used to any of it. But my whole goal was, no, Long Tall Sally, he's basically yelling. Hound Dog, he's basically yelling. But then you go to Peace in the Valley, where it's gospel, low end. You do, all that stuff where I want to portray those versions. That's All Right, Mama, he literally sounds like a child. And so when I come out on Million Dollar Quartet, That's All Right, Mama is my first like big opening song. Sometimes I'm like, I hope this audience understands I'm trying to portray the young version right now, like the super young version. And so when he gets the Peace in the Valley, hopefully they know, oh, it's a gospel song. So now I'm going to give you a little more deeper end / what you may think Elvis sounded like because he got a lower voice towards the end of his life. But anyway, so I carry that, where it's like, oh, I hope the audience doesn't judge me too hard, because if you're not a hardcore fan, you may not know that Hound Dog wasn't sung in the low register till the later years, But I do want to backtrack and say, so that's what I carry with me. I can't imagine what every Jerry Lee Lewis carries in the show, because it is written for him to be essentially the star driving factor of the show, and he's the comedic relief, and so he's on stage, I think, the whole time. So he's like, that's another pressure, because we all know of Jerry Lee for Great Balls of Fire, but when you come see the show, you're like, wait, I know all these songs too. Same with Johnny Cash.
Really cool about the $1 Million Quartet musical is that, unlike other musicals, like, you couldn't take just Danny Zuko out of Grease and be like, he's going to do his own thing now, like, that would make no sense. But you could remove every single one of the characters from $1 Million Quartet, which is something that you do anyway, because you do your own Elvis tribute act. And I'm assuming that the actors who portray Johnny Cash could do a Johnny Cash show, a tribute show, and I know that those happen, and every single one of those people, is that kind of like, do you guys reflect on that when you're doing $1 Million Quartet? Be like, well, we could conceivably each go our separate ways, do our own thing, and then come back here and do this show again. Is that kind of a unique quality of this music?
Yeah, I think that's super cool, and because we all do it. So what you just said is literally happens. Our Johnny Cash has his own Johnny Cash tribute show. Our Jerry Lee does, it's not a Jerry Lee tribute, but he does his own piano-driven shows where he'll highlight some Jerry Lee stuff, because that's what he does, but he's a genius keys player, so he'll do other, songs and incorporate musical theater and other hits. Our Carl Perkins does other rockabilly shows and stuff like that, and his little tribute show. So our bassist travels, and I'll hire him for my own shows, and everyone hires him because he's amazing. The drummer's been doing $1 Million Quartet drumming, but he also does Buddy Holly. Like, he's a singer, guitarist. So everyone does do that. And oftentimes in this show, I've done the show, I think, in 10 different productions total, probably. And I've almost worked with new people almost every time, and almost all of them have some type of side project tribute show. And a lot of it is because this show kind of sparked that for all of us in a way. It definitely began my career as Elvis, for me at least. And it is cool. You're right. Like, as far as musical theater goes, you can't really take Sweeney Todd out of Sweeney Todd and say, all right, well, here's his tribute show now, which I would go see it. But yeah.
He just shaves faces and cuts hair for a while and then sings an occasional song. It wouldn't make a lot of sense.
Or Danny Zuko does like Christmas ballads or something, but
right.
But yeah, it's super special.
Which I also would go see that.
I think what makes that special and unique, which listeners may not know, is that we all play our instruments live on stage. There's no orchestra, there's no tracks, there's nothing. So with that, every person's a master at their instrument. And in this cast specifically is one of the best I've ever performed with, because they're all passionate and very good at what they do, and all very humble and great humans. So it shows, and I'm sure you'll see it on Sunday, where we genuinely enjoy each other and get along outside the show as well, and hang out. And on stage, we have so much respect and love for each other that it just kind of flows. And I think you can sense it while we're performing, because I've done shows where not that you don't get along, but you may not hit it off. It's just like, it's like meeting new friends or whatever. and it's like, oh, we're gonna go do the show and it's gonna be great, but there's a different magic when you actually all, respect and love each other and hang out outside the show and all those things,
Right.
because it kind of shows through what we're doing on stage.
It's almost like the best of both worlds when it comes to, because being in a band and you've toured in bands like modern bands and stuff, you can get on each other's nerves really
Yeah.
easily. It's like, but if you are there with other people that you really respect, it can create for magic on the stage for sure. So I teach a pop culture class and I've been doing it for a couple of years now. I love it. And it's actually what kind of prompted this podcast in the first place is a pop culture class. And I had a student he was into musical theater. He performed in all the school's plays, and I'm hoping that he graduated a couple years ago. I hope he's made his way, because he really aspired to be on Broadway. But he put it well one time. He said, Broadway is where pop culture goes to die, where, stories that have run their course in movies and TV shows and other forms, that's their final landing place. But it seems like this is not true for $1 Million Quartet, where it's not like it died there. It was almost like that story was revived there. And so who wrote $1 Million Quartet? Who put it together initially?
There's Colin Escott and Floyd Muttrix are the original writers of the show, and music directed by Chuck Mead. I'm not sure how they all came to be as far as friends or writing partners or whatever it may be at the time. But yeah, Colin, I believe, is from England, and I believe he's considered like early rock and roll 1950s like historian. So he was already in love with this music and all this stuff, and he thought, well, what a special night this photo was taken that we all have for like proof. And I think at the time, the original sound recording album was released or around there, because that night there was actual recording. It wasn't Sam Phillips in our show, it's considered Sam Phillips, but I forgot his name, but pressed record on I think it was like 2 microphones in the studio that night, which they couldn't release for so long because Elvis was on RCA and he's technically being recorded at Sun Records that night. So it was like a secret for a very long time. So all we had was the photo for years. And it was printed in a newspaper, and the reporter coined it $1 Million Quartet as the photo. So I believe that's, where Colin and Floyd were like, well, this is special. We both love this music. Let's make something out of it. And I'm not sure how long the developmental process was for this musical. I think its initial start was in Chicago as far as like the roots, which a lot of Broadway shows start there. And I know it opened up on Broadway in 2010.
I'm so glad that they made it, because it clarifies that image so much. I think we've all seen the photograph of the 4 of them crowded around the piano. Elvis is on the piano, and they crop out the woman, right? In a lot of the pictures, there was a Elvis's girlfriend at the time was hanging out with them, and she's on the piano itself, but they always seem to crop her out of the picture. And there's like almost like a air of mystery around that picture. Like people just kind of see it. It'll show up in textbooks. It'll show up in magazines. It'll show up in poster form. But it's like nailing down the exact, like the context of it is never really brought into it. It's just like, and these four people were famous because of rock and roll, and like, that's it. It's like, no, you don't know how monumental this night was. And I was reading that, and I have the book somewhere. I don't know if it's with me right now, but I know that in Johnny Cash's autobiography, Cash, he has it's almost like the order in which the people arrive to the studios is one of the questions. Like, it's a record of history of like, okay, who was there first? What were they doing?
Yeah.
And then who showed up? And Johnny Cash claims that he was actually in the booth while the other guys were, so he was there the whole time, but other accounts have him showing up last. And it's like, most of us just seeing that picture wouldn't even think that there's that much of a story behind it. Like, I always thought it was just like a promo picture that like Sam Phillips asked somebody to take a picture of these four guys, and they just happened to be, it wasn't until I went to the museum that it was explained, this is what the significance of, and there's the piano, there's right there, that they did all that. So it's like, thank you to the creators of this musical, and thank you to those of you who perform it, to kind of not only clarify but just extrapolate on it. Be like, okay, because I know there's parts of it that are taking liberties, right? Like, they add a few songs that weren't necessarily performed, and obviously the model of the show where Sam Phillips explains, you guys freeze right on stage when it's explained kind of where he discovered this artist and the first time they recorded and stuff. And that's, artistic license is taken, but it's, it seems like the entire thing was it came from passion. It came from love. It didn't come from, hey, how can we keep Legally Blonde still going? Like, it was like, we need to do this so that the next generation, this new 21st century generation, and onwards, will appreciate and fall in love with this music like everybody else has. So that's a great thing. Is there anything else about the show that you think kind of conveys a message to the audience? Will it be, for every time somebody goes to see it, depending on the age group, I guess, what will they walk out of the theater after seeing $1 Million Quartet, like, feeling or thinking?
Well, the way I've always viewed this show when I was a fan and now doing it is, so you go in because of the name, or that it's music, it's live band and it's the 1950s, but ultimately you go in thinking, all right, I'm gonna go see an Elvis show with a bunch of other people. That's like not me being Elvis, that's just like off the top. And then you go in and then you love everyone loves Johnny Cash, so it's great to hear like a hits. And then you learn about Carl Perkins and Sam Phillips, and then you leave a fan of Jerry Lee, all in be all. Yeah. He steals the show every time I've done this show, no matter who the Jerry Lee is. You have to be a genius to even play the way he does and perform. But I think ultimately you're just going to walk out literally feeling like you saw a rock show, because that is what it is, with a story through line. Yeah. And for the most part, a lot of it is very factual in history, not necessarily that night. So on that night, they all were just getting along. There's probably 15 to 20 people at the studio that actual night. So all you're going to see is 8 of us in the storyline. And and Elvis and Carl Perkins were good friends, but in this story it's dramatized to kind of express, maybe the hardships that Carl had to go through, because he wasn't necessarily a superstar like Elvis, when really Carl Perkins wrote Blue Suede Shoes and it was a hit, but Elvis just made it a little bigger. But they were good friends. But, you're going to get like the drama out of it because it is a theatrical piece. And I think it's really good and really well done. Particular, this version of the show is one of my favorites, which, by the way, is directed by Hunter Foster, who was the original Sam Phillips on Broadway in this show. And he's directed this many times before. And he's a great dude and one of the best guys I ever worked with as far as this show goes for me. Very understanding. The fact that he was in the original cast, I think, kind of puts its own little magic to it as well, And
considering the role he played in that cast, what a perfect, it's almost like They always say in baseball, the catchers make the best managers because they can see the whole field. So, like, who better to be the director of
Sam Phillips
$1 Million
is
Quartet?
taking on the role again, but even just above our Sam Phillips, where he's like, now I'm the guy overseeing everybody. And what's great is when he would talk to us in rehearsals, when he talked to me, I see Sam Phillips in him because I'm like, he knows about Hunter Foster, our director, knows about Elvis on the same level I probably do, because he had to study it so much. And I know Sam Phillips almost as much as him because I had to study the Elvis Sam relationship. And I think everyone kind of got that in their own roles, and it kind of, I think it shows in the show. And one of my favorite versions I've ever done is this version right here. One of the best casts I've ever been in is right here. And they didn't even tell me to say that. Okay. It's just truly how I feel after 6 years of doing it. But it's super special. I think from what I've heard from everybody, that everyone's walking out just losing their minds on how great the show is, how fun it is, how amazing the music is. And, luckily and so nicely, people say that the live music is absolutely perfect. And, they're just blown away that we're actually playing live on stage, which is the best compliment for any musician after 25, 30 years of playing,
The Mississippi Blues Trail and the $1 Million Quartet musical are both exceptional examples of what can be done with primary sources. My guests and I on this podcast stop at taking these things apart and discussing the historical significance, but creating an award-winning musical or an educational tourist route that brings people in from all over the world from documents of the past, well, that's all right with me. Aaron Scott can be followed on social media at Audio Chic, that's Audio Chick without the K. Daniel Durston is at Daniel Durston and DanielDurston.com. The Everything is a Primary Source podcast can be found on social media as well, including YouTube, but especially Instagram, at the EPS Podcast. I look forward to you tuning in again to the EPS Podcast, where everything, including the Mississippi Blues Trail and the $1 Million Quartet Jukebox Musical, are primary sources.